Newsnight, now on BBC Two with Jeremy Paxman.
They're frustrated and disappointed and not going to take it anymore. Public sector workers closed schools and operating theatres today to protest at reforms to their pensions. Even people who wanted to work couldn't get there. The disruption the union said was unfortunate but necessary. But we're all getting poorer. Can we afford to pay them what they demand?
A lot of people in the private sector really don't see any need for what we're doing, and you're trying to justify your situation with theirs. It's proving very difficult.
The General Secretary of the main union involved and the Minister responsible are both here. And today more evidence as if we needed any more, that it's going to be years before incomes recover to the level they were at even 9 years ago.
As the experts run the numbers on yesterday's announcement, it's clear the poor could suffer heavily and the pain could last a decade.
SAFE is committed to resolving contentious international and domestic issues through dialogue, debate and peaceful negotiations.
And what was the LSE thinking of in taking money from Colonel Gaddafi's son after a scathing report? We speak to his examiner. Well, with us now is the Conservative MP Claire Perry, who used to work in banking and is also a former advisor to George Osborne. Philip Stevens is an associate editor of the Financial Times. And Lord Skidelsky is emeritus professor of political economy at the University of Warwick and has written several biographies of John Maynard Keynes. Keynes. Right. Philip Stevens, does it feel like a lost decade to you?
I think it does. I think if you look behind all the sort of clatter and clamour of the last few days and the wonderful debates as you've just had, the real story is that this time it's different, really different. I mean, you and I have lived through lots of booms and busts, Barber, Lawson and the rest, but those have been like hangovers after a rather wild party. People have, taken the pain and then life has continued as usual. I think what's crystallised this week is it's not going to be like that. We're going to lose through this a large chunk of our national income, and people's earnings, standard of living, are not going to shift over about 10 years.
Robert Skidelsky, do you think there's been anything like this?
Well, it's been compared to the Great Depression of 1929, 1932, and it's not as deep, but it's lasting a bit longer. And I think there's a great chance that there'll be a lost decade, a miserable decade. It's sometimes called the new realism, but it needn't be. I think it's a consequence of policy.
You mean to say we needn't have a lost decade?
No.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes, we needn't have a lost decade.
And what the solution to that is doubtless Keynesian, is it?
It is, yes. I believe it is Keynesian. I believe you've got to build up, not cut down. And that if you cut down, then you're not going to cure your deficit, and the income of the economy is going to shrink.
But the country's bankrupt.
No, it's not. I mean, when you have lots of that's talking in money terms, just money. But if you have lots of unemployed resources that are idle, 10, 20% of capacity isn't being used, how can you talk about being bankrupt?
You're looking forward to a lost decade?
Well, based on your numbers, the decade started 5 years ago, and since then we've had the biggest boom and the biggest bust in our history. And I do think I'm kind of at a disadvantage because I'm with two very clever economists here, but I think in the real world, well, you're right.
I'm a
journalist.
And I don't know what the collective noun for a group of economists is, I would hate to think, but in the real world, I think the idea that we have a problem based on borrowing, and the solution is to have more borrowing to get the borrowing down, and in the process sacrificing interest rates which are, as of yesterday and today, lower than Germany's, just doesn't stack up.
You don't believe that's going to last?
Well, it's lasted for over a year now. Our rates have been trending down. But it's what the government thinks. It doesn't matter. But if you actually look at what's happened to interest rates, Britain has been a safe haven. Rates have come down. That is worth £10 billion, a pretty big fiscal stimulus to mortgage holders across the country.
Look, the argument you save on interest rates by having interest rate interest. £21 billion was the figure the Chancellor
That's
gave.
worth something to people out there.
in order to get that, you're reducing your revenues by 50 billion. You have a negative number.
Well,
and that is a consequence of cutting down.
Again, I think people out there don't understand. Like, again, the other economists do disagree with you on this point, sir. But
economists never agree on anything.
Exactly. So therefore, the collective noun should be a disagreement of economists. But again, we have a debt problem. We have to grow our way out of the debt problem. It was very striking yesterday that the business leaders of the country really welcome what was said against very little fiscal headroom, and I don't think in my constituency this feels like a lost decade. It feels like a difficult
I wonder
decade.
if it's not just a decade, though. I mean, I wonder if we're not kind of getting the point of reckoning now, which is the consequence of decades and decades of post-war spending in this country.
I'm not going to intrude on the sort of the economics argument, except to say we have lost a big chunk of our national wealth already, and that means when we come out to the other side of this, even if we grow quite strongly from now on, Britain's going to be another country. It's going to be a different place.
What sort of place will it be?
Well, we're going to have a smaller economy. I think we're going to have in the end a smaller and rather more selective welfare state. I'm not advocating this as policy. I think this is just the facts of life. I think we're going to have a smaller international footprint, no more Afghanistans, no more Iraq, no more aircraft carriers, no more fancy planes to fly off them. We are going to, if you like, going to have to own up as a still pretty wealthy, middle-ranking country with a lot less in terms of pretensions.
And in the big
agree with that analysis completely.
Oh, you don't still think we're going to be sitting at the social
No, of course.
table?
No, not that. But it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Of course, we'll have a smaller economy if we simply declare a quarter of the population is redundant. But then, of course, by definition, we have a smaller economy. What's happening at the moment is their skills and their spirit is simply being rusted away by them not being employed. And I agree entirely with you when you said you need growth. I'm glad you said that, because you've got to grow your way out of debt, not cut your way out of debt.
Is there an argument for, I mean, look, again, I'm no concept, is there an argument for quality of growth? You mentioned the skills, which is a very, very important point. One of the things I see as a governor of two schools in my constituency is a complete sea change in the way people think about basic qualifications. No more gaming the league tables that only a civil servant in Whitehall reads. Let's make sure every child gets at least a C in GCSE mathematics. We have let, I think, a generation of young people down by not giving them
that's a slightly separate point. I wonder as an economist, can I just ask you, if you ask our economist friend over here, how much do you think of the pretense we have maintained of our position in the world has actually been based on an illusion for the last 20 or 30 years?
Well, I mean, position in the world is a different matter from the state of the economy.
Well,
there have been lots of illusions.
With respect, the two are absolutely linked. One stature in the world, I think it was Admiral Mike Mullen, the head of the American Armed Forces, who said the biggest threat to our security and our position in the world is the state of our economy. So the two are 2 months ago, don't worry. The two are linked. And if our economy was based as it was, I think, on, if you like, a rather fraudulent belief that the financial sector would continue to produce vast amounts of tax revenue forever and ever, and it's now clear that it's not going to, then we have to make that adjustment, and we have to adjust our view of ourselves in the world.
Yeah, the figures are against you.
I was very struck by the graph we had up of a huge boom in spending. From 2002 onwards, that boom was fueled by borrowing. The government spent more than it took in taxes every year. Now, whether we choose to do that going forward, and an expectation of a continuation of financial services taxation, these are choices to make. And to me, the choices are about getting back to an economy that is built on private sector growth, where government is on the side of businesses rather than putting meaningless regulation in their way, is on the side of giving our young people the best possible skills they can get, and is on the side of building infrastructure, which is creaking in this country. And these are all things that the government is saying are critical choices we want to make with a very, very limited amount of monetary headroom. We could be in a better position after the next 5 years. We will certainly be in a much more sustainable position than we've been in.
Yeah, the
Would you like to put Mrs. Pangloss right?
Well, first of all, the deficit was extremely small in the years of Labour government.
I think they called it drift, Robert. Drift every year from 2005.
A very, very small drift, and also people confuse the issue by talking about structural deficits, and I don't think you'll want to have a big discussion on what's a structural deficit and what's a
countercyclical. That's another night when we've got a lot of time.
Oh well, I think you need a lot of time, and it's also all based on very dubious figures of one kind or another.
Gap between what you're taking tax and what you
don't stop the discussion.
I think in the real world people understand what that is.
But Robert seems to think that, look, I don't think we should be in total thrall to the bond market, but Robert seems to think that we can have, if you like, Keynesianism in one country.
No.
That we can do what we like in terms of borrowing and spending.
And our interest rates
now, I'm in the awkward position that I think both Ed Balls and George Osborne have a point, as they were. But I think we have to be realistic. You cannot just ignore what used to be called the loans of Zurich, I think, now spread more evenly, I think, around the world.
Look, two quick points.
What's your answer to that point?
Look, two quick points. First of all, our success in the 2000s, or our growth rate, were not entirely illusion and simply depended on fictional money being generated by the city.
Unsustainable.
No, why? They were unsustainable because they weren't sustained. Everything's unsustainable that collapses in retrospect. That doesn't mean it wasn't sustainable at the time.
We had the highest level of public and private debt all through that decade. That's not sustainable.
Well, but, the argument that we have low interest rates because everyone has enormous confidence in the government's fiscal policy. We have very low interest rates, partly because people don't know where else to put their money, and partly because the Bank of England has been printing money.
Okay, thank you all very much. Thanks. Now, one of Britain's most prestigious universities, the creation of some of the country's... Well, that's quite enough excitement for one night. Good night.